All right, here we are in Charlottesville on Monday night, and we have a variety of folks visiting with us today. And we've been having a great conversation, but we're going to turn to some of the questions that you've been sending in. Amy sent in a question that we've all been talking about that we found very interesting, and that's how can we use healthy competitive tension to drive design thinking? I think tension is at the heart of so much creativity, right? I mean, without tension, it's back to our discussions of necessity is the mother of invention, right? If there's no tension or no resistance, then we tend to do what we've always done. And I think one of the things that makes being a manager in today's environment challenging is it is so much about managing tension. Right? And again, as we said in the design thinking world, in a world of uncertainty, the rules don't work as well anymore. So every decision, there's pros and cons, and there's tension on both sides, and we have to make a judgment in the face of uncertainty, as opposed to being able to rely on a rule. So I think tension it's the stuff that our life is made of. The question is, do we use tension to help us to find better solutions?
She mentioned here, she thinks that business leaders focus on where they sit in the competitive market. So how can you use design thinking to use how can you use healthy competitive tension to drive design thinking in this scenario where the business leaders are sitting on where they are in the competitive market?
Anybody have any ideas on that?
I think where she says is if you're not aware of competitive tension, I mean it's hard to start. But once you have that and you are like in a big trouble, or I think you will use that to try new tools, and design thinking works many times when you need to innovate in extreme urgency, and I think using that kind of urgency, it's crucial sometimes to speed up the process. And in this scenario, I'm not sure which competitive industries he's talking about, but it's definitely more easier or faster the introduction of design thinking also in a particular scenario, a small group, small bets, and rather than just getting let's implement design thinking in Walmart, like the whole organization at once. And so I think that's also need to be specified a bit better which scenario you're talking about.
Well, I mean, if we talk about creating dissatisfaction that helps people get ready for change, in design thinking, we would traditionally expect that to come from empathy with customers, right? In the world of strategy, we always expected it to come from fear of competitors, right? And so traditionally, our motivation, the way you got someone's attention to change, is you help them understand that the current situation was not sustainable in a competitive situation, right? So we know that that's often how we got people to be open to change, by realizing that other people had better products than they did, or other people were behaving in other ways differently that created more value. And so I think certainly the competitive dynamics can be an important driver of a willingness to use design thinking. I don't think it can substitute for customer empathy as the core of creating the insights that lead to innovation in design thinking. Right? I think the trouble we've had in strategy, using competitors as the motivators for innovation, is basically benchmarking. Right? So we've done a lot of benchmarking and copying and all of that, I think. So I can see fear of competitors as an important driver and a creator of tension that gets people ready to try something new. In order to make sure that something new has real value to customers, though, I think in part, you have to turn away from that focus on competition, which we've often had, and redirect your focus to customers. So that's how I would describe that one. I think Sveta's question on why we interview people individually rather than in groups is an interesting one. Especially design thinking is so insistent on collaboration in the idea generation process and in the insight process and all. It's interesting to think about why we're not more collaborative in the core data gathering process.
And she's mentioning specifically about the interviews, and she's saying like, aren't the expectations of the interviewees huge? So why not do a workshop, or why do separately their own homework?
I think in part it's the difference between what is and what if, right? When we're in creative brainstorming mode, I think we want a group of people to come together and have their differences challenge each other. I think the concern is during the what is stage, you're trying to go deep to really understand someone's view of their own reality and what's happening in it. And I think what we worry about is the focus group phenomena, where you put people in a room and they start talking to each other. And on the positive side, they start triggering all kinds of new thoughts. But on the negative side, groupthink can take over. And you're no longer really getting access to the actual experience of one person. You're now almost kind of contaminating that with the rest of the people in the conversation and the influence they're having. So, for instance, we often talk, Tim Ogilvy would talk about how when we're coming up with the ideas, we want a diverse group of people together, but when we go out into co-creation with customers, we want one customer at a time. Because if you put two customers in the room together, they will influence each other, and you won't get the quality of the data you'll get out of that one customer. So I think that's the tension we're talking about here, the tension between kind of getting as accurate a feedback from one individual as possible versus this wonderful world of creating new stuff that benefits so much from groups.
Now, I hear that question a little bit differently, and I'm curious about the answer. I hear her asking about preparation before doing the interviews. Would the what is stage begin with interviews, or would it begin with some sort of hypothetical journey mapping or other background research to prepare you for the interview?
And you just repeat the question then. She says, I'm very interested in the project tools such as journey mapping and visualization to gain deeper understanding of the client need, as a preamble to the question. So why not in a workshop where you would be better collaborative in a workshop mode? She works with heads of schools and teacher educator in India, and they feel they could generate each of these things much better together. With that group, it would yield much greater synergy.
Okay.
I think it's kind of hard. Maybe that's one that's lost in translation a little bit.
I think she's saying that she is working with these heads of school and teacher educators, and they think that it's better to work together. The heads of schools and the teachers, instead of going after each teacher, each head of school, and trying to get insights. So I think it gets back again to your point of what is and what isn't.
That's the situation I had when I came into the first class. Just with reading the material, it gave me the idea to reach out to my customers and my clients, and we were setting up a kind of a group situation. And that one word, when you said influence in that first class or that first meeting session, that when Frankie and I got together, I said, well, Frankie, you came up with the idea we better do this on an individual basis as a part instead of doing it as a group.
Yeah. And I do think it is the difference between data gathering and idea generation here. If all the teachers and the heads of school have to work together to implement a new idea, then at some point need to align on their assessment of current reality. We know that. I mean, you can't build a new future with people who all are assessing current reality different. You just will never get agreement and alignment, right? So a tool like mind mapping that we talked about is really an alignment tool in which you start with the data and you build insights about the data together, which allow you to build a common set of design criteria, right? But what you bring into mind mapping is more at the individual level, like you're talking about, Alan. Right? So the core material you build the insights around is mostly obtained from individuals one-on-one, I think. And then together you can generate insights and come up with new ideas. That's how I would differentiate between what you do alone and what you do together in the process.
It wasn't, I think her name was Paula, that was here last week. Wasn't she experiencing a problem kind of similar to that? There was one person in the group that was kind of intimidating, and they weren't able to get their ideas, looked at objectively because of this one person. I think she said she had to actually get to the point where they had to remove this person from the equation.
Well, I know that's the traditional problem we have with brainstorming. That's why we're so fond of the blue card technique where you actually write the ideas down. Because in a traditional brainstorming where we all just shout out our ideas, the people that are most comfortable shouting out their ideas are the ones whose ideas generally get heard. I do love that notion of HIPPO, the highest paid opinion in the room. I think that is a classic way of describing what so often happens in any of these group settings. Without the structure that gives everyone an opportunity to contribute, contribution will be kind of overwhelmed by either the authority figure, the person with the most power, or just the loudest person in the room. Right? And so I think that's in part what we're trying to get around to here. Can we take one more, maybe? Let's pick one that I think will allow me not to just completely repeat what feel like I've already said so much time. I think this number one question from Mario. What if customers don't want to co-create with you because it reminds them of their problems? That's a great one.
And he says, especially like the example of health issues, they have a specific health problem. How you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're looking at denial now, right? Another mechanism. For many of us, denial is the first step in ever being forced to deal with anything unpleasant that we don't like, right? But I think what's interesting here is how someone is framing it for themselves. Right? I mean, for instance, we know in this kind of studies of some of these smoking cessation business ideas that traditionally people in healthcare would frame smoking as a negative health habit, right? And as long as you framed it as a negative health habit, it was very hard to get people who were still smoking to enthusiastically engage with you because somehow, they were branded when they started and made to feel guilty for who they were and what they were doing. And what they found in this study was that the framing that allowed people to be part of the conversation was a framing around, I'm doing this today, but tomorrow I'm going to make a different set of choices. So it was about choices and helping people to make different choices and preparing them to make different choices. So the image they said that they used was much more of a personal trainer or an athletic coach rather than this image of a doctor in a white coat kind of pointing their finger and saying, you've got to stop smoking, it's bad for you, right? So I do think this question of figuring out the frame that lets someone talk about what's bothering them and what they'd like to change and maybe how we could create better value for them is really critical. And particularly when it's negative things like health problems, we have to be very careful as an interviewer not to frame the whole discussion in a way that makes it less appealing for them to have the conversation in the first place. Now, that's kind of a chicken and an egg, right? Because until you know the framing that's acceptable, how do you frame it in a way that's acceptable? Right? So it seems to me it takes a lot more skill to be an interviewer in that situation than in a lot of other situations, because we've got to be really good at just creating an opening for someone to step into it and tell us about how they see their world and how they're open to us seeing their world, right? I think it's a much more challenging ethnographic assignment than our normal journey maps are. But if you're going to work in an area like that, I don't see any way around it, really. You just have to be better than everybody else to make progress.
Yeah.
All right, it's 6:30. Should we?
Yes. I just say that on top of that, you're saying about the problems, and just make sure you go and try to research their needs or their intentions, their motivations. So it's different than the problem, right? You try to always step away from the problem, and so the questions will be much inclined to know what. So why do you think about that? Why do you feel that way? Or what makes you interested in that? So you have to go deeper down in the motivations, not forget the problems. Go at the root of them.
Well, I mean, that kind of gets to Murthy's question there about how you deal with a diverse set of stakeholders, right? I mean, the challenge usually when dealing with a diverse set of stakeholders, it's the original definition of a wicked problem that we talked about in the very first class, right? Problems are wicked when we can't even agree on the definition of the problem, much less the solution to the problem. And the more diverse the stakeholders are, the more their fundamental definition of the problem is not aligned with each other, right? So if we go in through the problem framing, how do we get anywhere, right? Because all we'll do is have a big debate about how to define the problem. It's like U.S. healthcare, right? We can debate about what is the problem that we're trying to solve here, right? Very difficult to kind of pin that down. So I think this whole issue of how you create a conversation where stakeholders can talk about what's important to them and what are the challenges in their lives and as they see it, so that we can begin to, try and create some space where we can come together about maybe just the outcomes we'd like to produce. I mean, maybe we don't have to agree on the definition of the problem. If we all agree on a set of behaviors that we would think get us all a set of outcomes that we can mutually agree on, does it really matter if we all agree on the problem? I don't know. Seems kind of heretical, again, in our world that where we have linear problem solving, and step one is define the problem. Right? And I think one of the beauties of design thinking is we continually redefine the problem, right? Every time we learn something, our definition of the problem shifts. So it's that shifting of the definition of the problem that may well be what's really important for the creativity, much more so than all of our methods about how we think we get to better answers. Interesting. All right, let's eat cheese.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Jeanne, for
this
sharing
is
with
great.
us.
Yeah, oh no, thank you guys for coming back.
Oh, this was a huge treat.
Louise has no choice, but the rest of you are here voluntarily.
Thanks again. I keep sending your questions to our hashtag DesignBiz and to my Twitter @LuisVeloso. We'll keep bringing the questions to Renee. Thanks very much.